On this week's show, longtime professional photographer Daniel St. Louis. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us here on Sports Inclusive. What's your earliest recollection of picking up the camera and taking a photo?
Well, I know what camera it was. It was a little Instamatic, and I regret not having one in my hand here. It's a little square camera, square negative, and I might have been 3 or 4 years old, and just thought it was amusing, and yeah, it's not the first time I saw a camera. My first memory ever is a flash, and I remember waking up in a flash, and it was my uncle here in Moncton. Actually, we were visiting Moncton, and as I found out later, I saw the date on the photograph as I got older, and it was I was literally like 14 months old.
That's crazy. It's
Embedded.
been it's been an amazing journey for you in the profession. But the racetrack, believe it or not, of all things, really propelled you into sports photography.
Well, it was my parents had racehorses, so, and I went to school in St. John. I was going to school uh, for power engineering. I'm supposed to be working in a power plant. I'm supposed to be literally a Homer Simpson doing that job. So what I did is, while I was going to school there, I needed some money, and I went to work at the racetrack and cashing tickets, etc. Fast forward, my parents would come down. And that was my chance to see them once in a while because they raced horses there. And I noticed there was no photographer, and I thought, oh, wouldn't that be neat? So I asked, and I took a few photos, and I'd been playing a bit, before that. So there I was photographing horses crossing the line, and the excited winners, the horse that never wins, running down to get their picture taken with the winning horse.
Timing. How pivotal is timing in that moment, Daniel, to capture a moment in time, if you will?
Right. Well, they're panning across the view, so I knew that I had to follow them, and I had a sense of where the line was. So it was guesswork at first, and it didn't take long. I was capturing them pretty much on the line every time. I only had a one-shot deal. I was shooting film at the time, so you couldn't rattle off a bunch of images. So you had to be aware and ultimately capture them. I didn't figure this out afterwards, but ultimately capture them with all 4 feet off the ground as they're crossing the wire. So
what was school like for you? What was school like for you? Yeah.
Oh, God. That's a good question. I was a little all over the place. I had I would drift and dream, and I had a little trouble focusing on certain things. But when it was a good topic, a topic I liked, I usually bit into it pretty hard. I enjoyed it, but as a student, I wasn't the most focused. Depending on what it was. I don't know how good of an answer that is for you.
When did you know that you wanted to be a photographer for the rest of your life?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I didn't want to. I knew that. I just remember watching photographers that I saw because I thought it was interesting. I like photography. I played with it in high school, but it never occurred to me to do it for a living. And I thought never, because I didn't know at the time. I couldn't remember a photographer who had a half decent car, and it's a crazy measuring stick. But it was like, is that it? Like you'd have to really love doing it to do that. And so I didn't really take it seriously as a living, for making a living. And then at the time, after I went through school, There was, in those years, the mid 80s, there was a slowdown in work. All the baby boomers had been graduating all at once, and so many of them ahead of me. I was like in the tail end. So there was no jobs. And the racetrack thing was for fun. So I kept that up. And I took on to another track. I thought, well, I'll fill some time. And then eventually I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to do this, I may as well do it right and do it the best I can and see if I can make a living at it.
How challenging is that, Daniel, to take that leap of faith and say, I'm going to go and take this as far as it can take me? How difficult is that?
Well, when you're young and you don't really know what is, you just give it a go. You take every job you can, you learn everything you can. It did interest me, and it was pretty quick. By the time I was 20, 21, I was able to teach a basic photography class, and to teach is twice to learn, they say. So I sped up my learning very quickly because I had to tell people, I better figure out how to stop action, explain to be able to explain to somebody, and I had to learn that, and I had to learn a lot of other things, and it did propel me. So that was a start. I had the racetrack to make a few little dollars here and there. I didn't have any overhead. Every time I had made a little bit of money, I'd buy one lens or one flash, and I learned how to use that lens. And I knew when it didn't work. That was key, is to know, okay, when it doesn't work. But it was key, but I shouldn't say that. It was key to remember what you did right. You shoot a whole bunch of stuff, and a guy at a camera shop would give me some ideas. Okay, go shoot this, try this, and try this setting, and then do this and that. This is before I started teaching. I just remember I'm going back to those moments how I was learning, but I remember learning one at a time, one lens at a time, because I could only afford one lens at a time. I didn't get a bag of equipment. Thank God, because it would have been all over the place. So it forced me to figure out what I can do with this one lens. And I know, my dad worked with a photographer when I was a kid. So I remember seeing images coming across the table. He would write and stuff. And I just remember being fascinated. So, and I noticed things that were really cool. And subconsciously, you pick up composition, you pick up, lighting came, but like one piece at a time helped me, as I'm saying, and I had a keen interest, so I was absorbing it fast. So, and slowly but surely, I took courses and went to the States and tried to get better at the craft and better at the craft. I knew there was lots to learn. So,
from an experience perspective, what did you gain from experiencing every different sport and every different event that you went to and attended, and from capturing dignitaries to athletes? How did that help you, and what did you learn every step of the way?
Well, first, so just to bridge the little gap there I had from not knowing anything, had no job, trying to figure out the racetrack. The track announcer was Howie Trainer, and Howie Trainer was somewhat known in the horse sports industry, especially sports and TV and the horse races. So he was a track announcer. So we would travel back and forth sometimes from St. John to Fredericton. I lived in St. John early on. And he was the managing news editor of the Telegraph Journal at this time. So he calls me up and he needs photos, and he has trouble getting photos. So he fired stuff at me. He says, "You can do this." And he just threw me in the fire. So my first learning lesson was to get over the fear of a dignitary, I need a front page shot for the Moncton paper. And I didn't know much about photojournalism, but I understood the moment a little bit and everything. So the first fear, though, I remember going in and photographing the mayor of St. John in their office, and I was terrified. I was just terrified. And I slowly got over that. It's just terrified. I was also terrified of kids and weddings, and eventually those things worked out well for me in the early part. So maybe it's key to be terrified of something first, and it really makes you pay attention a little bit more to get through it.
What's your favorite moment to capture? Is it athletics? Is it the event? Is it for, potentially the restaurant that hires you out for advertising? What's your favorite on point moment?
Well, I'm somewhat of a people person, so I think I connect first with emotion, body language, emotion, pleasant, happy, a laugh, something you can't um, just create. You have to actually capture. So there's two things. There's one you're going to one is to be responsive, and the other is to construct and build. So I can create a photograph with a product. I can add the lighting. I could choose the composition. I could build it. And but my favorite is probably the emotion part, because it's the hardest one to catch. It's that decisive moment, if you want to call it that. So it's that horse crossing the line. You have one, just such a fraction of a second to get it right. And when you capture that with people and life, and be it a smile, a laugh moment, there's going to be an image I'll send you. Didn't send it to you yet, but I'm outside at a wedding. I still shoot the odd wedding, so because I enjoy people, I just don't want to do summer full of them. But I just remember hearing a voice behind me, okay, it's time, let's go. And I turn around, and I just, to the corner of my eye, turn around, and here's Brian Murphy being hauled by his wife Jackie by the tie. It's time to go home, but he was having a good time, and he was telling a story, and I didn't look to the camera. I just turned and, like, boom, boom, I grabbed this shot, and the moment was telling. So that was a win for me, if you will. That's what I felt. That's what I saw. That's what I heard. But it was that win. So I think that is when you get that little win, of that excitement, that moment that says it all. That's really kind of fun, it's really awesome.
Well, it's awesome having you on Sports Inclusive. We'll be right back with more of Daniel St. Louis. Welcome back to Sports Inclusive, joined by none other than Daniel St. Louis. Daniel, you have a unique shooting perspective, especially at the Avenir Centre. How special is it to be ice level? And you have a history of being ice level, a goaltender in your previous life.
I didn't say I was a good one, but I had my moments. Thanks. Yes, you do watch the game from back there, and you have a different perspective of everything going on in the building. So being at ice level with the Avenir Centre has been a real treat. I can, before, in the old rinks, there was no glass in the penalty box, so that's where I would want to be. So I was privy to some of that in the early years, and then the glass went up for protection, which I was. So the Avenir were back, and I'm at the center line in this magical little box between the two benches. It's really awesome.
When you're there shooting a hockey game and shooting the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, the Moncton Wildcats, or the Memorial Cup, how many photos would you take in one game?
Well, it depends on it depends for sure on the type of game it is. To fire off 250, 300, usually it's 250 per period. The first period tends to have a little more energy. There's a little more happening. So I may get a few more captures there than I would in other parts. So it's really hard to say, but those are the numbers that I tend to see when I'm downloading, and there's a lot of waste, but you shoot sometimes because you don't know. You think something might happen between the time you saw it and the time you press the button. But you try to anticipate, and you'll get some magic in that. And you get used to the players, how they play and how they turn, and you can see stuff coming sometimes before it happens. I'm sure the fans do too. But I'm looking through a narrower. Typically, I'm looking through a narrower view. Try to keep one eye open. Yeah.
Well,
I also try to
there
keep
was
one
some
eye open for the puck.
exactly. There have been some close calls this season between the benches. What's your
Yeah.
fondest memory of the Memorial Cup, and a very special Memorial Cup for you personally in 1997?
Well, without absolute knowledge of the Memorial Cup, I was early in the game of photography for watching the Wildcats. Wasn't photographing for them, but I went to the game. So, long story, I am adopted, and in 1995, the Quebec government opened their books conditionally. As long as both sides were willing to meet, you could meet your birth parent, and I put that into motion. I connect. It's April 25th of 1997, and I surprise him with my. Long story short, he didn't know I existed. My mother did. So I had met my mom, and he didn't know. So what a surprise! And so we have a good chat. He's open, pretty interesting, and within a week, I said, "Look, I can be there in a week or two." So I drive up, and he says, "Oh, do you like hockey?" I said, "Well, sure." And just not paying attention to what could be playing in the month of May. So we get to the rink. No, at first I meet him. It took forever. That's a story in itself. But it's, finally, I finally get in the car. I'm an emotional bag, and we get in the car and we're driving to the rink. Probably 35 minutes after we meet. He's a little bit in a hurry, and I'm not quite understanding it. So we park, and all of a sudden we're walking and walking and walking. I get to a building, go into a side door of this building, and everybody knows this guy. It took me 2 years to find him, and knows this guy. Going through the crowd, knows this guy, and I'm like, this is like the Coliseum when I'm, because I photograph a lot of people, and it's like, how did I not find this guy? So then we sit at a seat right behind the players' bench, and I look down, and then as a presentation, the game gets going. I'm like, I know these guys. This is the Olympic, the Hall Olympic, and I think it was Shikumi with our future coach to Moncton Wildcats and the other bench, the little that I know. And I was like, I know these guys. Claude Julien in front of me. His head's like 2-3 feet away. Turns out he's a friend. So it turns out my dad, my birth dad, was a director of promotions for the Olympic. He did that as a part-time thing, and it was just the coolest thing. And then it's just so funny because here's a team that I did not like because they kept, anytime we played them, they kicked our butts. So that's my Memorial Cup experience. So let me tell you, I had my camera and I wasn't long shooting, and I wasn't long getting a press pass. And a week later, I drove back up. It was insane, and I got on the ice, and I just lived it. I shot the whole game. I decided to shoot the whole game in black and white, and it was. I still have not printed those, but I'll go back one day.
How special is it? How special is it for you to be that person capturing that moment and have all access to the best dignitaries, the most famous dignitaries, Daniel, the Wayne Gretzky's, the Bill Clintons? What does that mean to you to have that full access? And how difficult is that for you?
I think I've dealt with the responsibility in the newspaper. Photojournalism, photography is what it knocked those barriers down for me, because I was seeing them all the time at press conferences and so on, and I'd have to get closer than anybody quite often to photograph them. So I would dare say I got a comfort level with that, so it didn't bother me. And I somewhat felt invisible after a while. I had to think that way. And whether I'm at center ice of the hockey rink or and just off, the only thing I'm concerned about is getting in front of the TV cameras. So, um, I, so yeah, I try to make myself invisible. I think I am, and I try to conduct myself so that I'm not really noticed. I do my job. When I meet them, I don't know. It's not a problem anymore. I have a comfort level there, and I usually know the people in the room, and it's gotten better and better. When we have these high security situations, the better I know little by little, I've gotten to know the whoever does the security for the prime minister's office or whatever leader we have coming in from around the world, the Francophonie Summit with 50 some leaders and all the motorcades everywhere and the chaos. It's just kind of neat. But you realize you're just a little bug compared to all that's going around. So I got comfortable with it. And when I'm put into action, when I know there's a moment, I did get the photo, Charles and Camilla, when they visited, I knew I had to get a photograph of them coming out of the car, and I had 50 some media behind me, around me, one on each side, but I was usually one of the 2 or 3 leads. So I had some advantage, but it doesn't matter. You've got to get the shot. You're there for a reason. And it's super important to be at your very best. And I swear to God, the whole world slows down in the slowest of motion when that's all happening. Sometimes, the cameras are getting better, but the cameras, remember them simply not me to capture. I just couldn't get that button to fire quick enough sometimes because you could see it when you need it.
How has technology helped and hindered the profession, Daniel?
Well, we've come a long way. We went through hell and back with digital. We went from really decent quality cameras, quality films. Films were getting really good in the 2000s, and then somebody decides to say, "Hey, we need stuff fast." So the 5K TV, if you will, became second place to the YouTube low grain quality image because it was faster and it was more. So that's my best comparison. So we had to learn our way through that, and the hardest part was printing because I was making my living selling prints. So, but we went through it. Some did way better than I did, and I did maybe a little bit better than some. I'm in the middle of the pack. I wasn't a master of anything, but they made it better. And now my big 2.25 cameras that are sitting on shelves here, I'd love to get one out with a roll of film in it, but I absolutely don't want to work in that.
Daniel, what's your fondest memory of capturing a sporting event and your favorite in-action photo of an athlete?
A lot of photographs. Which one? I remember the moment, some of the moments in our Memorial Cup in 2006 that were spectacular. So it's a little bit of a toss-up between that one of those games and the 2010 President's Cup. So, but I think the first President's Cup still goes back to 2006. It was the building was just alive. I'd never seen the building so alive and so wild. I don't know if I had a magic moment, but there was, except for piles of photographers everywhere, nobody in control. I had access to the team, and I knew I could get them together for the Wayne Gretzky shot. And it just came to my head. I wasn't even sure I was supposed to do that. And I just remember grabbing a few players, guys, we got to do this. We got to do this. So, and the press were sitting back, and they were press photographers. I mean, they just need somebody to take control. They were happy to have it happen. So that was kind of neat. It wasn't just a photograph, but it was the whole way it came together, and everybody was so excited. And I let everybody do what they had to do. I grabbed a couple of shots, but just pumping them up, and well, they didn't take much. I just had to trigger them a little bit. And to me, that was one of my best, most alive. What a great place to be! Moment in sports that sits with me. And I see that massive picture on the wall at the. We used to see it at the Coliseum, so I know it's up somewhere. Just that moment, I think. If so, I don't know if it's the best photograph, but it's certainly the best moment in hockey in my personal life.
What's your most fondest memory, and what's your best picture you've ever taken, Daniel?
Well, I'd be holding it in front of me if I was a few feet away. There was that moment where I missed my daughter on the potty because I was working long hours. But the next day, I come home and I get she's on the potty, and my daughter was 2, and I still go back to that. And I snuck to just in the doorway, and I had the camera. I just started my head in the camera, and I was just quietly, and I go. So it's a side shot of my daughter in the potty, and you see the details later, but click, and now she hears me, and then surprised look in her eyes. She turns, looks at me. So click, and then she gets back to business, and then she has her head almost down between her knees, and then the last shot is her with a big smile laugh, kind of a smile laugh of success. So I never thought that kind of photograph. I knew it meant a world to me, but I kind of learned from that. My daughter was teaching me something already. That a moment is what you got to be doing here. It's you got to be focused on that pretty heavy and be aware of it. It's what we want to see, and that's why photographers of at least photojournalists at the time that's what they're about, is the moment.
What's the one piece of advice you would give a young photographer starting to get passionate about capturing the moment and capturing that moment in time?
I know it's tough. It's probably tougher than anything right now. Everybody has a camera. Everybody has an idea. Everybody wants to, and it's a thicker field of photographers out there that are trying to make it. At the same time, if you have the will and you really want to work it, you really want to go for it, you also have to know that there's a lot of people without that. I'm sorry, but they don't necessarily have the drive, and you got to stick with it. It's not it's a long haul. You're going to have little successes. You got to keep it going. You got to keep, if you really want to do this for a living, you've got to stick to it, be as consistent as possible. The newspaper tells you that, you're only as good as your last photograph. So every time you go out, you do the absolute very best, and then stop for a second, and then just go a little farther to the left or a little farther to the right, so it doesn't look the same. The best photographs is when I used to have to change film. I go back to my camera bag. I go back for a second, change film really quick. I had a different perspective. I'd find something new. So just stay with it. Do your very best. Ask a lot of questions, and observe how others work. I learned a lot more from watching a professional work than I did them actually taking the photograph. Just how they were with people, and not about how they framed it up or anything. It was just more how they worked and their comfort. And I thought that was, to me, that was the coolest thing. And I think that's my advice to somebody starting out that wants to do well.
Did you ever think that 3-year-old that grabbed that small camera would would ever have captured the people and the dignitaries and the athletic events that you have, Daniel? Did you ever think you get to this point?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Um, Absolutely not. I didn't think. I didn't know that was a profession. To be honest, I barely knew, and so hopefully it will remain being. There'll be a few of us that can still be out there, could make a living. It's getting watered down pretty heavy. So the composition has changed for what our industry. So there's still opportunity. You may have to learn how to write or do a little video or do more social media. So a little bit of marketing tied to it, but you can still have your heart and soul in photography, I think, even as a young person today.
Well, you are the heart and soul of photography in this city and beyond. Thank you so much, Daniel, for coming on Sports Inclusive, and we wish you nothing but the best.
Thanks very much, guys.